Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm Ross Coulthart, and today we have a fun guest. She's a good friend of mine, Dr. Beatrice Villaroel. She's a Swedish-based astronomer with a master's degree in physics and a doctorate in astronomy. And not only is she a brain box, she's also very, very interested in the subject of ETs. And she's spent a lot of time leading two projects: the VASCO project, which is the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations project, and the newly started EXOProbe, which is slowly setting up a network of telescopes to search for ET objects, locate them in 3D, and characterize them. And both projects are currently searching for non-human artifacts and probes in the inner solar system near the Earth. And if that's not enough for her, she's far too busy for her own good. In her free time, she has also initiated the European UFO Crash Retrieval Initiative, with the aim of searching for crashed ET spaceships in Europe, i.e., doing field trips looking for crashed spaceships. I can tell you, Beatrice Villaroel is a fascinating interview. I really admire her dedication as a scientist to covering an issue that is so stigmatized and taboo. Beatrice, welcome to Reality Check.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we go any further, Beatrice, one of the things I love about the fact is that you're in Sweden, and everybody in the debunking community always says that there's nothing that happens in ufology outside of North America. And yet you guys at is it Uppsala Airport in Sweden, have been being buzzed recently by supposed drones. What are they? Are we talking about something anomalous?
That's a good question. Last year we had some drones, because that's what we very often call UFOs in Sweden. We had some drones over the nuclear power plant, so maybe it was 2 years ago. Already, when I say last year, it could also be the previous year. And in the last 3 days, we also had drones over the airports. And it was first 3 days ago, then 2 days ago, and yesterday when I was flying back from UK to Sweden, there were also some drones right before. And they have discussed this and the Swedish police, and then they made a report to NATO. And now they have come out and said that there is no evidence that there were any drone sightings at all. So, what to make of all of that, we don't know.
So this is a very similar situation to what we've been seeing over many Air Force bases in the United States. Often there are objects clearly reported by locals, civilians, and military personnel on the bases. They're called drones because that's the useful explanation, and it's also a more neutral one. But is the suspicion that there was something anomalous happening over Uppsala Airport?
Well, I think those in the UFO community are, of course, wondering if these are UFOs rather than any drones.
So
It's,
tell me, Beatrice, are you a believer? Have you seen anything anomalous yourself in your career?
I never seen a UFO. I just hope to see one. Yesterday, when I was flying back from UK, I was hoping to see a UFO in the window. Of course, we were flying through the clouds. I saw nothing, and it was dark outside and light inside, so it was impossible to see anything.
You're like me. I mean, my friends who have seen UFOs, they tell me that whatever they are, the non-human intelligences are doing this to keep me skeptical. So maybe it's the same with you. Maybe you're more effective as a scientist by being kept skeptical. So let's talk about your projects. The Vasco project. Can you explain it to me, please?
So, the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observation project, it started with a search for vanishing stars in 2016. So we started with the idea of that one could look for some objects that, let's say, some star that is there in old images, and then one day they vanish, because we hope to see some kind of super advanced civilization that just would go and kill off a star, or turn it into a black hole or something like that. We never found those things, but we found something super interesting that was different, and that we found like some images where you can see multiple objects that look like star appearing and vanishing within half an hour. Now, that was something we didn't expect to see, and that was something also that we are still working with, because when you work with the Vasco project, the main thing is that we use plates from the early 1950s when there were no satellites in the sky. This is like um, it's like, imagine you have a sky that is completely clean from all human contamination, no space debris, because today you have like millions of pieces that are blinking, blinking pieces of space debris, and you have so much of garbage outside the Earth. While if you go back to these early images, it was clean.
So the very first human object in space was the Russian Sputnik satellite. That was 1957, am I
57.
right?
Yes.
So before that, there wouldn't have been any artificial human objects in space, correct?
Exactly, unless there were some black programs that they will not tell us about.
And what have you found? Obviously, the slides that you're talking about, these are glass plate slides. What observatory slides were you using?
So we were using glass, or like digitized glass plates. So they have actually digitized all these images, or not all, many of them, from the Palomar Observatory, which is in California. So it's
So
a
that's on the west coast of the United States.
exactly, and so we have used those, and we compare them to Pan-STARRS, which is from 2013 and 2015. These 10 years ago, and we compared the images of the sky, and we looked for, while we were looking for vanishing stars, suddenly one day, and this actually, for as a fun thing, this happened exactly the same week as the pandemic started in Europe, that I found this image of 9 stars that were there on the 12th of April 1950, and that were not there again and couldn't be seen there half an hour earlier either.
Oh,
And
so
that's
some so
very
some of
famous.
these slides were taken within half an hour of each other. That's the
Yeah,
really
there,
useful thing. You can actually show a period of time where a bright object or objects were in the sky, somewhere in space above our planet, visible to a telescope, and then half an hour later they weren't there.
it looks like that. And we want to know whether this is a real observation. Because one thing that people tell us is like, oh, but maybe these are just some kind of plate defects. But when you think about plate defects, I mean, a defect, it's something random, that kind of a random um, thing that happens on the plate, that maybe in one case you will see something that looks like a star. But what we do is that we actually measure the brightness profiles of these objects, and we compare them to the real stars in the field. And what you see on the 9 stars, these 9 transients, is that their brightness profiles is identical of the real stars in the field of that have the same intensities as these stars. So
So
they look
what
completely
does
like
that mean?
stars.
Why is that relevant? Why is it
I think these are
relevant?
no plate defects. That's what I think.
So a plate defect would have a different brightness profile. It'd presumably
I
be a lot brighter,
think
wouldn't it?
random shapes, and maybe different brightness profiles, be like either much, let's say, wobblier, or I mean, plate defects also kind of strings and streaks, and anything is a random thing. I
So
wouldn't
you
expect it to look identical to stars. So that's why I think these are real observations.
so you call these transients. So they're essentially transients because they're objects that are appearing on a slide in one exposure, but they're not there in another.
Exactly. And if you would, let's say, if you would think that what you're seeing is some kind of asteroid, then the weird thing is that, let's say, if you would have an asteroid that moves so fast that it's there in one image and not the other, it wouldn't leave a point source that looks like a star. It would leave a streak as it moves. And the same with meteors.
So these were stationary objects. They're not moving.
Whatever we see looks like indeed stationary objects that are far away from us.
Okay. So obviously what you and I are really interested in is techno-signatures, the possibility that these might be craft or maybe some kind of Dyson sphere, something that's emblematic of a technologically advanced civilization, maybe a spacecraft hovering in space somewhere, possibly in orbit. How do you delineate between that extreme possibility of a non-human intelligence and other natural explanations? What are the natural explanations that, as an astronomer, you have to take into account to consider are possible explanations?
So we have taken all kind of natural explanations into account and looked at it, and there's no natural explanation that can give you 9 objects that appear and vanish within half an hour. So that's why the plate defect was the only thing we could come up with as a potential, like a potential explanation. Except for that, I don't think it is that because of the reasons I already explained. So one thing that, let's say if we would see this today with the same instrumentation, let's say we use Palomar today and we take the glass plates, then you would be able to see this all the time because you have satellites and you have space debris and you'll have flat metallic surfaces that will be reflecting the sunlight and give off short glints, sub-second solar reflections that look like transients. So if you see it today, it wouldn't be magical. But again, this is 1950. So it's something, it doesn't add up. And that's why I'm so interested. I want to know, are we seeing artificial objects around the Earth in 1950?
We live in one of the most advanced eras in human history. We've never had as many medical breakthroughs assisting our health as we have in this current era. And yet, at this exact same time, there are millions of Americans who are suffering unhealthiness and obesity in what is an epidemic of tragedy caused by bad food. So what's going on? According to a US board-certified physician and expert nutritionist, Dr. Amy Lee, one of the major reasons is 3 harmful foods that are being passed off as health foods all over the country. And wait till you hear this. Because these foods can cause weight gain, clog your digestive tract, deplete your energy, and wreck your skin, they're actually banned in other countries. They're forbidden to be put into foods. Yet shockingly, they're still legal in the United States. And it's time someone shined a light on what they are. Dr. Amy Lee does just that, while explaining how the side effects from these foods are wreaking havoc on the health of millions of Americans. The great news is it's easy to stop and reverse this damage by simply learning which of these foods to avoid and how to spot them. And by doing so, you can experience easier weight loss, smooth digestion, and vibrant energy. To find out these 3 fake health foods, go to 3harmfulfoods.com/Ross. That's the number 3, 3harmfulfoods.com/Ross, or click on the link in the description below. After years of extensive study, Dr. Amy Lee put together a revealing video, totally free to the public, so you can never get duped by these foods again. Find out all you need to know by regaining control over your body at 3harmfulfoods.com/Ross. That's numeral 3harmfulfoods.com/Ross. Or just click in the link in the description below. Okay, so before we get to the issue of artificial objects or potentially artificial objects, which is by far the most exciting aspect of your research, can I just explore with you what might be some of the natural explanations that you've had to consider to rule out those natural explanations? I think one of them is something called gravitational lensing, when the gravity of an adjacent celestial object somehow distorts light and bends that light and obscures that light. Can you explain that to me, please?
Yes, so if you would have a gravitational lensing there, or like effect from gravitational lensing, you could expect maybe some kind of changes in all stars in that same field. However, we only see of these 9 stars, and all the other ones are unaffected.
So,
And we also have
take
different times.
gravitational lensing out. What about, say, a supernova or something like that?
Well, it's extremely unlikely to have 9 supernovae happening there all at the same time, and also they usually take months. It's not half an hour.
And you've already explained that it couldn't be a meteor or a comet because if it was, you would get a streak in the exposure because it was moving. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So, what are the other? Is there any other explanation, natural explanation, that as good scientists we ought to be considering?
Well, we were thinking about, for example, well, we were thinking about supernovae. What else were we thinking about? I already forgot everything we were thinking about. But what we did was that we looked at, let's say, a phenomenon, and we looked at the typical rates. How frequently does this happen on the sky? And you can see that all these things like supernova and micro lensing events, all those are happening far more rare, and definitely not in such a small area of the sky. So we could just ignore all of that.
So, let me be very clear in this. So, what you see are nine objects in one particular region of the night sky. It's not disparate all over the visible night
Exactly.
sky. So it was nine objects in one particular region. Are you able to isolate what area of space it was? Was it in orbit? Was it far out? Are you able to figure that out from the
Have
slides that you
one
were looking at?
image, and that's what's the problem with the Vasco project. We have one single image, so you can't say how far out it is. It could even be, in principle, somewhere inside the atmosphere, but very, very high up. It's just that we can't tell that from one single image. Imagine if you would have some nine objects that would pop into existence high up inside the atmosphere. It could also look like that. So we need actually, that's why we need exoprobe, where we can actually localize them and tell the distance.
So I'll get to exoprobe, but I first want to hear now. So we've ruled out all the possible natural explanations. You're talking about nine transient objects that appeared on a slide in, I think, did you say 1950?
That was 12th of April 1950.
1950. And they're not there in a slide half an hour later.
Exactly. Or maybe
So,
it was earlier, actually. And
yeah.
then we looked also 6 days later, and we looked 30 years later, and we looked at, we even took the world's largest telescope, the Gran Telescopio Canarias, which is a 10.4-meter telescope. And we went super deep, and we looked at this place, and there was nothing there. And we said, okay, here we use this very big telescope, and there's nothing on the place.
And
So
what do we know about the time, the date of when this exposure happened, when these nine objects appeared? Is there any significance in that date in 1950 at all?
we checked it. We didn't find anything special on the 12th of April 1950.
So, what was it, Beatrice?
I don't know. I wish I knew.
But can we assume that one potential plausible explanation is that whatever they were artificial. They
Yes,
were there. They were capable. Whatever they were there 1 minute when a slide was taken, and then half an hour later they weren't there when another slide was taken.
exactly. And if I can spin further on your thought, if I may, we have later we kept on working with like searching for new examples. For example, I was thinking about that one way how you can actually show that it's not plate defects is if you find several of them that are aligned on a line, because that would be something that comes also with a movement. And we wrote a paper, we published it in Acta Astronautica about how to do this search, and the referees were happy with the way how we suggested how one would search for it with the statistics. And then finally we made a search, and we actually found two examples that were statistically significant where you can see several along a line. So here is one image, and what you can see here is that you have five objects that are aligned along a narrow strip, as you can see here. And the probability to have this by chance is 1 in 10,000. It's a so called 4.2 sigma statistical significance on this detection.
And what does
And
that
it
mean
happens.
for a bear with a very simple brain, Beatrice? What does that mean? What do
It's
we?
the chance to get five transients aligned on a line, or just five objects aligned on a line in such a image, is 1 in 10,000. It's very small. And you can see this example here. And on top of
So
that,
could they be spacecraft? I mean, is
It
it
could be.
plausible? Is it
It's a
plausible to
possible
you that you might have?
explanation.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, what's behind all of this is the implication is that these are artificial objects of some kind, perhaps non-human spacecraft.
And to make it even better, it happens on a date, but we didn't know that because we posted it on archive first with an error in the table where I had the wrong date. I converted it wrongly. Now we have corrected it. Well, still not on archive, but we already know that the correct date is that it happened. This our best example on the 27th of July 1952, which to me, when we wrote the paper, was an obscure date. However, later my colleague Enrique Solano found a beautiful example of three transients that uh, again, like they were the brightest and most beautiful of all our examples, where you see three transits appearing and vanishing again within half an hour. So here you can see these three beautiful stars. You see it in one image, but you don't see it in the other. And this one happens on the 19th of July, 1952. And that is when a friend of mine, David Altman, pointed out, hey, do you know what this date is? I said, no, I have no idea. Well, it's a very famous date, uh, this Washington D.C. UFO flap. I said, "Oh, really?" So I went and looked at that. Wow, that's a coincidence, and
So,
that is
can I? This is just such a precious piece of research. I love this. This is good science finding something potentially anomalous, which cannot be explained naturally. There's no prosaic explanation that explains what we're talking about here. So you've got two dates in July of 1952, one the week after the other. One's the 19th of July and the other's the 27th of July, correct?
yes. And I had never heard about the Washington D.C. flap when we found these things. That's
And,
the
and,
best
and,
part.
and one of the greatest sightings in UFO history, it's one of the most recorded incidents in UFO history, was the notorious, as you say, Washington UFO flap in 1952. And it was when on two consecutive weekends, UFOs, apparent craft, certainly intelligently guided objects of some kind, were detected on multiple radar systems, military and civilian, over Washington. And it's funny because, you know, everybody talks about why don't the aliens come and land on the White House lawn? In this case, they didn't land on the White House lawn, but they flew, allegedly, right across Washington, D.C.'s very highly protected, secure airspace in a formation, in a fleet. And it really does beg the question, have you inadvertently, with good science, captured image of something that was potentially either in upper orbit or in orbit itself or near Earth orbit, which may in fact have been associated with these objects on those exact same dates?
I wonder the same because I don't know if this is some highly unusual coincidences that we happen to find these unusual extreme anomalies exactly on these dates, on these two dates. Because if it would be one of them, it would be a coincidence. When you have two of them, you have a bigger coincidence. And now, of course, I'm wondering if there's much more that can be found in these plates where you could actually find a correlation with known UFO sightings. And that's something I hope, or we're actually working on right now.
So,
It's a
so
big
just
work.
just explain this to me. So, are you able to say with any definitive conclusion that these are artificial objects? Like, what
Yeah.
conclusion legitimately can we reach based on what you know? You know that in a period shortly before the 19th of July 1952 and the 27th of July 1952, other photographs were taken and those transient objects were not there. But in those specific dates, which correlate to the Washington flyover, they were there. I mean, what's a legitimate scientific conclusion to reach? You tell
I
me.
cannot make a conclusion of this yet. What I can do is to form a hypothesis and say that it seems that there is a strong correlation between multiple transients and UFO events, and that in case we can show this correlation in a strong way, we would actually find support for that we see that UFOs are related to artificial objects.
Wow.
Um, that
I
are
mean, you
non-human.
might have
If we
captured
could fly, if we would
the
get spot.
implication of this, though, Beatrice, is that you may very well have captured proof of perhaps some kind of mothership, or perhaps these craft that were flying over Washington in orbit.
It's possible. But I would like to find better proof to convince myself
Now,
that.
are the images that you're talking about, were they also from the Palomar Observatory in California? And what's the likelihood that the field of space seen over the western USA might be relevant to what we're talking about, which was over Washington, D.C. in the eastern USA?
Well, if they are outside the Earth, then of course, if you have some mothership coming there, maybe you will see something even from Palomar. But if it's, of course, maybe it's more likely that you're going to see it better if you are at Harvard Observatory. That is much closer, and that's where you had the largest photographic plate collection in the world.
Okay, so that's my next question. I mean, Harvard's just down the road in Boston. Is there any plates that you can look at from that period to try to cross reference and perhaps even triangulate what it was that was seen from Palomar?
So 2 days ago, I got an email from Harvard's emailing list that the Dash project now are back on feet, and that's a project that has worked a lot with digitizing a lot of Harvard plates that have been there. So Harvard have been taking plates for 150 years. They have more than 500,000 plates. They had a little bit of a special story, but this plate collection is extraordinary. The telescopes are smaller and don't go as deep as the Palomar observatories, but they have so much that you can build light curves from.
Now, there's a bit of a story, isn't there, while we're talking about Harvard? There's a bit of a story about Harvard because one of the chief astronomers at Harvard for many years was a guy called Donald Menzel. What can you tell me about what you've discovered happened at Harvard?
There's a little bit There are some details that really make me wonder. To start with, about Donald Menzel, he was very famous as a UFO debunker, maybe the most famous UFO debunker of his
He was
times.
a scathing, let's be cruel about it. He was a scathing debunker, a person who really put the boot into anybody who suggested that there was any truth at all to the idea that UFOs might be non-human intelligences. He ran a tough, vociferous campaign for many, many years. And it turns out he did, in fact, have very close associations with the intelligence and defense community in the US. That only came out after his death.
And even more fun, he was the person that was in contact with General Samford when they arranged this big press conference on the 29th of July 1952 for the Washington, D.C. flap. And he explained, these are just weather disturbances. The radar operators were incompetent. And so he was in close connection with the US Air Force. And now the interesting thing is that 2 or 3 months later, he becomes director of Harvard. And as a first thing he does when he becomes director of Harvard is that he goes and destroys 1/3 of the plate collection. He asks his secretary to get rid of the plates. And some other plates he just throws into a basement when the astronomers are complaining. So there's a famous American astronomer called Dorrit Hofflight that tells about this entire situation with the photographic plates when Donald Menzel comes in as director. And she became persona non grata because she really didn't get along with Dr. Menzel. And she writes about it in a chapter in her autobiography. So I really recommend everyone who are interested to read that. And even more interesting, he not only destroys 1/3 of the plates, he also destroys some of the logbooks. And for 15 years, from 1953 to 1967, he stops the survey. So the Harvard Astronomical Survey doesn't anymore scour the sky. So you have
So,
15 years, it's called a Menzel gap when it didn't scour the sky.
Beatrice, why? Okay, let's be fair about this. Why would a scientist, a person dedicated to the study of astronomy, why would they want to destroy 1/3 of what I presume was a scientifically priceless collection of images going back many, many years? What's the rationale for that?
I wonder the same. Some people will say he was a theoretical physicist. Maybe it has something to do with storage, but for me, it's a completely insane thing. that someone would take all this work, that there's so many hundreds of people that dedicated themselves to do these plates, and would just destroy them. There was not even any reason to do it because they were so high quality.
Has
So
Harvard provided any explanation for why Dr. Menzel did what he did?
I haven't heard anything from them. But they themselves on their website talk about the Menzel gap when it comes to stopping the survey, which is two different episodes. It's not the plate destruction, but they refer to the Menzel gap on their webpage when he just stopped the survey.
I mean, let's be honest about it. It's quite sinister. I mean, you have a person who was involved in personally debunking the Washington flyover incidents and trying to explain them away as anomalous weather events, which was manifestly untrue. And he's involved in essentially destroying evidence that might have allowed further corroboration of that incident.
So it's even like some of the things that I'm learning now. I'm writing a new paper. Is that there was a exciting project called Moonwatch that started in '57 at the same time as they were as the first satellite was launched. And so it was Menzel's ex-PhD student, and also I think it was his best friend, if I understand that from Stanton Friedman's works. So Fred Whipple and Menzel were close, and Fred Whipple started this Moonwatch project, which was about searching for kind of all artificial objects. In those times, they were tracking satellites, and they had 12 stations all around the Earth, and a lot of citizen scientists who were helping to track these satellites. And that is also how Hynek apparently came into this entire topic, because if I understand it correctly, he was working with the Moonwatch. So I think Harvard in '50s must have been amazingly interesting, like for astronomers to be at.
So, do
Yeah.
we know what slides were destroyed? Do we know for sure if the 1952 slides that might have been taken by the Harvard Observatory in that period that you're talking about in July 1952, were they destroyed by
I
the
have
orders
no
of?
idea. I have no idea. I simply don't know what was destroyed, what wasn't destroyed, and what was the reason behind. I find it very weird, this sum of coincidences that lead up to this destruction, and add to it that Menzel also had his famous reputation in the UFO community. So, I mean, he's a perfect arc villain.
Yeah.
I like
So we really don't know. So we really don't know at the moment. Are there any, let me ask you this way, are there any slides that you know of held by Harvard University's astronomy section which might allow you to look at that area of night sky in that period of July 1957?
I have no idea, but what I would like to do is, of course, to look at this Dash catalog now, since it's up again, this database, and investigate if there's some material that can be helpful.
So it
But
might be that they, I mean, we just don't know yet because they haven't done the digitization.
I think they are finalizing the digitization now, and there have been a lot of up and downs with the web page. It has been off, and then it has been on, off and on, and now it should be up again. And I'm very happy that they have completed this project, because I think that collection is maybe one of the most it was called most valuable data collections in astronomy.
But let's be blunt about this, Beatrice. At the heart of this, there is clearly the suspicion that one of the most prominent UFO debunkers of the era misused his position as the head astronomer at Harvard to destroy potential evidence of non human intelligence.
It's a possible explanation.
Wow, that's very serious. Let's talk now about the ExoProbe project, which involves you setting up a proposed network of telescopes to look for ET objects. What is ExoProbe and how does it work?
So Exoprobe, it has taken us a little bit of a while to get it started, because when you buy a telescope through the university, it usually takes 1 year before you put the order until it arrives at the observatory. So imagine now we had the trouble with these plates that we have one image everywhere. So you can't tell the distance. You can't even for sure know that it's real objects you're seeing, because you still wonder, what if there's some kind of error in the image that you just didn't think about that would produce something false. So you still always play with this possibility that what if it's not real? And we don't want to have that ambiguity anymore. So exoprobe builds on that. You create a network of telescope, or you build it over time, this network of telescopes. And by having multiple telescopes watching one region of the sky, you can directly verify if something is real because you will see it in more than one telescope.
And I
And by
presume
having
you could triangulate as well. Could you calculate the
exactly,
distance?
exactly. So you can calculate this distance. If it's inside a solar system, you're going to be able to triangulate it. Or like we talk about, we measure the parallax, and will get the distance. You can localize it in 3D, but also we have a telescope that is taking spectrum in a wider field. So you directly characterize it, the object. So you can do so let's say you get three transients appearing and vanishing at the same time. When you do the exoprobe, you will be able to catch these three transients. You will be able to localize them. If they are, let's say, inside a solar system, you will directly estimate where they are. And you will get a spectrum that will tell you if this is a solar reflection that you're dealing with, or if it's some weird emission from something that you have never seen. And you see some weird lines and a very weird spectrum. And no matter what you get, you will get information. And that's what exoprobe is about. And the more telescopes you have, the more accurate the 3D localization.
So, how far apart do the telescopes have to be able to triangulate? And just for our audience's benefit, for those who don't understand what I mean, essentially, if you know the distance between the two telescopes on Earth,
Yeah, so we
you
are
can then.
interested. So we are interested in looking at geosynchronous orbits and beyond. We don't want to be too close to the Earth. And then we are going to have two telescopes separated by, let's say, 15 kilometers. We still need to get the second telescope for these 15 kilometers. And we hope also in the future to get two telescopes separated by 1,500 kilometers, let's say one in New Mexico, another in California. And then you can see out to, let's say, half the way to Mars and look at objects that far out. And I think this is the range where we are going to operate in, like inner solar system.
So let's say there's, Zug from planet Zeta Reticuli is chugging along in his hyperspectral cruiser, flying somewhere in our solar system, trying to avoid detection by us humans because of the Prime Directive. What your exoprobe could do is it could show how far away his craft is. Could you show anything about the size of the craft? Could you calculate the size of the object?
We could, but we would need more than one detection, and we would need to establish a pattern more or less of this object, how it's blinking, and then we could estimate the size.
So, how
And
many
we
of
could
these exoprobe telescopes do you have at the moment?
Right now, we have one single telescope, the ExoProbe, that we are now installing, the first one. Then we have our collaborators, a space laser awareness, that are complemented with a telescope for taking the spectrum. And we are trying to, of course, to do fundraising for the remaining telescopes. We will, or find people who want to collaborate with us. That's something also that we want to do. Maybe someone who is in the New Mexico, California area and has a telescope, plane wave, wants to provide a third telescope and a fourth so that we can really um, triangulate in good ways.
So, Beatrice, potentially you are in a position where, with either the Vasco or the exoprobe, you could uncover evidence of a potential non human intelligence, perhaps even in orbit.
Yes, I hope that we might, and I hope that we will.
How would you ever be able to definitively confirm? I mean, obviously, you can show a transient with the Vasco, and you can calculate, obviously, the size of an object and the distance of an object with the exoprobe. What would be the way of corroborating that it is, in fact, something non human, that it's an artificial object?
Well, let's say let's say we know all the artificial objects that are far out from the satellite orbits. We know which objects human have sent. And imagine you now find an object that is unlisted and it's far away. It's, let's say, it's somewhere halfway to Mars, and nobody knows what it is. But you know it's artificial, and you can guess that from the spectrum. And then you say, okay, this is unlisted, nobody's admitting to it, this looks very interesting, let's try to communicate with it. You can try to communicate, but then you could also actually make a space mission to go and fetch that object and pick it up if you find something really interesting. Or maybe you see some fantastically weird spectrum and weird emission, some weird plasma, or who knows what else.
Now, the third feather in your cap, Beatrice, is you've also been involved in creating the European UFO Crash Retrieval Initiative, which, if anybody's interested, it's a website called www.ecr-initiative.org. Tell me about that.
So that's an idea that we started with in actually around the 16th of December last year. It's just a hobby thing. It's on a very, let's say, it's a thing we do a bit in our free time. And we have created a database. Vasco is hosting the database where we encourage everyone in Europe to submit what they know about crashed UFOs, and we really mean non-human objects. We don't want to get any missiles or something like that. It's interesting. We have a number of people have submitted the sightings. Then there are some. We also have an Australian sighting, but we know that Australia is part of Eurovision nowadays, and so we have been looking at them. We had one suggestion that was really good that we later backtracked from. We were thinking of doing a field trip to somewhere in Europe where there was a alleged crash UFO, but then we actually bailed out because of several circumstances. We thought that maybe we'll wait for something new.
Now,
But if you,
I can
yeah.
imagine you're treading on toes here because I'm aware of allegations of Five Eyes countries, i.e., UK, USA, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, being involved in collaboration with European countries in what are alleged retrievals of non human craft. But I can imagine that's all very, very top secret. Aren't you treading on toes here by soliciting public information into your group for information on crash retrievals?
Well, we only are asking for information about flying saucers that have crashed, and according to the authorities, there are no aliens here on Earth, so they shouldn't be bothered. We are not doing anything that is bothering anyone. So if they are right about that, then all is fine. And it's a little bit interesting that when I've been talking about this at three different occasions, we were hacked within 2 days, the webpage. So I don't know.
You think the intelligence services are taking a closer interest than they care to admit in what you're doing?
I guess we will discover after the interview.
Can I ask you this? Have you had convincing evidence presented to you by good sources suggesting that there is possible UFO crashes and retrievals that have taken place in Europe?
I haven't been convinced yet by what we have received, and I hope that we will get something better. So,
Have you been invited by any political group or political organisation? Are there any governments taking any interest in your work?
I was at the European Parliament on the 20th of March presenting. There was a small meeting at the European Parliament organized by Francisco Guerreiro where I talked about science and UFOs. I also presented some of these from the Washington flap. I thought that this has to be known.
And Francisco Guerreiro is a Portuguese member of the European Parliament. I think he's soon to leave the Parliament. He's not renewing his tenure there, but he's taken a very close interest in the phenomenon and the possibility that there have been cover-ups, governments involved in retrievals of non-human craft that have been kept secret from the public. What was the reception you received inside the Parliament? Was it just Mr. Guerrero, or did you get other members of Parliament taking an interest?
um, I didn't what's called talk too much to people afterwards. So I kind of I think people were very positive inside the room. I also were contacted afterwards by some people, including someone from the European Commission, who wanted to talk to me after this. So I think there was some interest, but there is still a stigma, so people are quite shy about it. They prefer
Is
to
there
do.
an interest though? I mean, this is what I'm drilling for. I mean, there's a lot of debunker suggestions that this is all nonsense, that the Pentagon has suggested there is nothing to all of this nonsense about UFOs, that David Grush is obviously batshit crazy. The whole thing is a joke, and we should all just go back to our lives and ignore this nonsense about UFOs. Is that the impression you're getting from the European political leadership?
Um, well, I don't know anything about the European politics because I don't follow politics at all. But my impression is that there is far too much of interest from certain groups of people that are professional into the topic in order to dismiss everything. And I think I prefer to leave it at that and not go deeper into what I
I
mean. But
understand.
I can say it has changed my life in some ways digging into this topic. So I was a hard kind of very agnostic 2 years ago, and now I believe much more that this is a topic that has to be changed.
What has convinced you? What has been the moment, the tipping point, the moment when you realised I really do need to take this seriously?
Well, there were several things that happened to me. The first, the Washington plates, of course, was a very big thing, like realizing these weird coincidences, realizing the thing with Menzel. A third thing is that I was one of those who was fed with the stigma in some ways. Like I was marinated in the stigma as a scientist for a long time. And I thought that, oh, all the people who work with UFOs are a little bit weird or crazy because I seen this, they show you some TV documentary series in Sweden and you look at these people say, oh, I don't have much in common with them. You think a little. And then you realize you meet the people who work with UFOs and it's super talented, brilliant, smart, successful, much more healthier in all possible ways than normal academics. I seriously believe that there's a much like healthier attitude to life among the ufologists and among the academics. And
And
you suddenly,
a lot of those people are scientists too, aren't they? I mean, there's a lot of people in science who you and I know who are taking a very close interest in this subject, but they don't want to flag publicly their interest. A lot of scientists are engaging with this phenomenon like never before. Is that your experience?
exactly, it's a lot of scientists who are very engaged in that. It's really a lot of scientists. I think there is also some intelligence services interested in scientists who work on that, and I will not say anything more about it. But that has also been something that has made me think that it seems to be really serious, and people don't understand how serious it is. So I suspect I might be wrong, but my impression at this moment is that the stigma has been really. I support the people who think that the stigma was carefully designed, and where stigma didn't help to stop the scientists, enter other parties to try to slow down the scientists. That's my impression.
Can I ask you this as a scientist, and especially as a female scientist working in this field, have you been subjected to, if you like, stigmatizing treatment? Have you been ostracized in any way by your
Yes.
professional colleagues?
Yes, and it's a longer story. I don't know if there's time to take it, but so it's for me. It started in 2021, in May 20, or actually end of May or beginning of June 2021, when we found these 9 transients. And as I published it, and one of my um, colleagues or my second author on that paper is Geoff Marcy. So Geoff Marcy is a very, very famous astronomer from the exoplanet community because he, together with Didier Queloz and now I lose the names, Michel Mayor, the exoplanet guys who got the Nobel Prize, he actually discovered the first exoplanets, and they were like all working on these first exoplanets, and he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. However, in 2015, 3 months after he gets this $100 million grant, which is the largest grant ever to search for um, extraterrestrial intelligence, 3 months after, he suddenly gets into a sexual harassment scandal. I didn't know him that time, but he got into this scandal, but he kept on working. He published papers. He retired. He retired and left his position. He left this breakthrough list and that he was supposed to lead the SETI program, and kept kind of publishing. But however, exactly that week, as we got our 9 Transients paper accepted, by pure coincidence, the National Academy of Sciences announced that they are removing Jeff as a first person ever from the National Academy of Sciences. And they do a press announcement, so it's written in the Science Journal, it's in Nature Journal, and then suddenly everyone jumped on me for how can you work with Jeff? And I start getting excluded from conferences. I get horrible social media comments. I get unpleasant phone calls. It has been so many things happening since I've been blocked from conferences. Basically, my astronomy career was kind of has been closing at that time. But the problem here is like for example, I had one offer that came from the SETI Institute about like applying to become affiliate. If you become affiliate, it means you can get grants. And this came at the same time as they knew that they would be getting $200 million. So it was a great career opportunity to become an affiliate and later maybe see if I could get some support. But then they asked me or told me that if I wanted to become an affiliate, I had to drop Jeff Marcy from all papers and from collaborations. And I just couldn't do that. It just wasn't the right thing to do. This is my collaborator. And for me, I'm really a human rights believer. For me, human rights is something so important. I believe in the right for a due process. Jeff Marcy never had a due process. He was never in court. And I believe in the right for the redemption. Even if someone did something bad 20 years ago, they shouldn't be hunted forever. And these two things, and the right to be treated with dignity. And since I'm a human rights activist in that way, I just couldn't accept this offer from the SETI Institute. And since then, of course, I get rejected from conferences, and it's astronomy professors doing that. And I keep resisting what they want me to do, and I will keep working with Jeff as long as we enjoy the collaboration.
Do you believe that you are being ostracized because of your stand on searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, in part?
I think both things enter here. And it's also possible that that some academics who are working, who are emotional about that I work with Jeff, also are being useful to some other parties who don't want people to work with UFOs. I don't know. I think it's such a mess there.
I know you recently prepared a paper for an international conference on astrobiology and the future of life, and I was sorry to hear it was rejected. And the really puzzling aspect about it was that you'd written an abstract about your exoprobe and VASCO projects where you're searching for alien artifacts near Earth. And that was sent to a conference, I think it was in Houston, which is essentially looking at the issue of techno signatures, i.e., ET signatures. Were you rejected? Is that correct that you were knocked back for a paper with that conference?
Yes, but a miracle happened. 1 hour ago, I received a new email where they changed their mind and they're inviting me now.
Oh,
So
fantastic. That's
I'm
great
very
news.
happy about it. So they are inviting me for a poster, and I will accept it. And I'm very grateful for that there was a change in the decision.
Oh,
So
that's
it shows that
wonderful
things
news.
can be. It shows that things can be changed and things can be improved. And I'm happy that they made that decision at the organizing committee. Thank you.
Well, ultimately, what you're all about, as far as I can see, Beatrice, is good, solid science. And there shouldn't be areas of science, should there, where we fear to tread because of stigma and taboo. Do you agree?
I completely agree. I don't. I strongly believe in academic freedom, and I believe in the freedom of the thought. If someone tells me that something is forbidden, and I mean, if you look at the SETI thing, I mean, where it's okay to look for signatures far, far away, but it's not okay to look inside the solar system. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing. It's so limited by human imagination that, yeah, I don't see a reason for stigma.
But really, at the heart of this, you have a suspicion, don't you, that one of the reasons that you were ostracized by some in astronomy is because you've been looking perhaps a little bit close to home.
Yes, I think I wonder if this story would have happened if we would have never found these nine transients and just kept on searching for vanishing stars and publishing something completely different, zero results. I
It
really wonder if all these things that would have happened.
it really does make me wonder, though, Beatrice, whether there's other cases that we could look for. I mean, it's quite exciting. The idea that there might be in the archives of astronomical observatories all around the world evidence that it can be digitized and then matched with today's imagery to see those evidences of transients, objects that were in our night sky that are no longer there. It really does beg the question if all along there's been evidence sitting right under our noses that might corroborate things that we're only now in the process of beginning to understand. It's a very exciting area of science. I think it's fascinating that you're doing it.
I think so too. And what I suspect is that many times there is evidence there right under the nose, but people, scientists, maybe when they see something unexpected, in many ways they react with, "Oh, it has to be wrong," because this. I mean, I get if you get marinated in the stigma, your instinct is to reject anything that is anomalous.
And
And
you're looking, I understand, for funding for your exoprobe project. You need help getting the funding to do the exoprobe research. Is that correct?
Well, I have 2 years now of that I'm paid to work on ExoPro. But yes, in order to be able to triangulate, we would need funding maybe for one or two additional telescopes, or we would need collaborators who would want to step in and join us in these searches that have access to these telescopes. So it's the alternative
Well,
also.
Dr. Beatrice Villarol, I think everybody watching this would think that the work that you're doing is commendable, and you've shown great scientific rigor in doing the work that you're doing. So, congratulations on the work that you've done to date, and we wish you the very best for your future projects.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining Reality Check. Dr. Beatrice Villarol, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you back sometime soon when you've got more exciting discoveries to tell us about.
I look forward a lot to. Thank you a lot for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk.
Well, g'day and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart, and what an intriguing week this has been. On the 6th of June, maybe we should call it Pentagon D-Day Disinformation Day, the Wall Street Journal published a story entitled "The Pentagon Disinformation That Fueled America's UFO Mythology." One of the reporters, Joel Sheckman, touted his story as a bombshell, boasting that this Wall Street Journal investigation had spoken to 24 current and former US officials, scientists, military contractors involved in the inquiry, as well as reviewing thousands of pages of documents, recording, emails, and text messages. I think this Wall Street Journal story will go down as one of the last gasps of the UFO UAP cover-up cabal's desperate attempts to put their finger in the torrent of leaks now threatening to expose their dirty secret. It's one of the daffiest, wackiest attempts ever by the national security state to explain away the growing evidence for the mystery of anomalous phenomena that is now being far more frequently reported in our skies. It's clear that much of the sourcing for this investigation came from the former head of the Pentagon's UFO investigation efforts, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the immediate past head of AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon that supposedly investigates UFOs. This was Dr. Kirkpatrick's big chance to get square with his many critics, to use one of the most influential papers in the United States, the august Wall Street Journal, no less, a pillar of the financial establishment, to put a stake through the heart of what are now multiple first-hand allegations, witnesses alleging that the United States has secretly recovered non-human alien technology, and that there's been a multi-decades-long collaboration between those in the know, in government, the military, the intelligence community, and a select group of private corporate aerospace companies involved in working with this retrieved tech. I don't think it's any coincidence that this dim-witted, moronic, block-headed Wall Street investigation appeared online at almost the exact time that another former senior Pentagon official entrusted with investigating UAPs, Jay Stratton, went loud and hard at the SCUAP conference at Huntsville with a detailed speech elaborating on past admissions he's made as a former director of the Pentagon's UAP task force that he is a first-hand witness to non-human intelligence. Quote, "I have seen with my own eyes non-human craft and non-human beings," says Jay Stratton. That's pretty definitive. You will never read that anywhere in the Wall Street Journal, which has made it very, very clear with this story that it is happy to be a craven, toady mouthpiece for the national security state. According to the Wall Street Journal and Kirkpatrick, we are being asked to seriously believe, drumroll, that the United States government has been lying to us about a cover-up about aliens for decades. Sorry, wait a sec. The US just said that it's been lying to us about a cover-up of aliens for decades. Well, duh, yeah, exactly. Of course they have. Why is that news? Well, it turns out the twist in Dr. Kirkpatrick's mea culpa is that while he was at Arrow, he supposedly heroically discovered that the US military was creating the very conspiracy theories it has spent decades debunking. The way he told it to the Journal, new US Air Force officer commanders were indeed formally inducted into what was presented as a classified briefing about the US's possession of flying saucers. They were in fact shown photographs of an anti-gravity maneuvering vehicle, and they were told that this super secret operations code name was Yankee Blue, and that it was devoted to reverse engineering alien technology. Terrified officers were threatened with prison or indeed death if they spoke about it, explicitly warned never to mention the program. Many were ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements, and Yankee Blue, of course, was supposedly a smokescreen for genuine, highly sensitive new weapons development programs. The story went even further, attempting to debunk what has clearly been a thorn in the side of the US Air Force's credibility on this absurd cover-up for decades. The evidence of multiple witnesses, including Captain Robert Salas, Bob Salas, that in 1967, at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a giant UFO hovered over a missile silo and deactivated 10 of the thermonuclear missiles he was in charge of. The Wall Street Journal's reporters claimed Kirkpatrick had discovered this was, in fact, a secret test of an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP pulse, to test the effect of EMP energy on America's strategic nuclear missile deterrence. Yes, we are meant to believe that the US Air Force would be stupid enough to put a massive electrical discharge through 10 of the most dangerous weapons on the planet without knowing the effect that that might have. So, what does this Wall Street Journal story really mean? What the hell is going on? Is it really the death knell, as Dr. Kirkpatrick clearly hopes, for the claims of a UFO UAP conspiracy cover up? Or is it more likely what I suspect it is, disinformation masquerading as disclosure? To help us analyse this story, I'm joined today by Rob Heavily and Mario Woods. Rob is a medically retired structural and design engineer with 20 years of experience managing heavy commercial and government building projects. He's a former Cold War era US Marine infantryman, and he now conducts independent research into UAP, NHI related government materials, both declassified and open source. His work has focused on obscure technical aspects of defence infrastructure, and he spent a lot of time investigating this EMP testing claim. Mario Woods, I've long wanted to get on the show. He's a former US Air Force Security Police Staff Sergeant who, with a colleague in 1977, was on duty at Ellsworth Air Force Base in North Dakota, protecting the nuclear missile silo facilities there. He and his colleague witnessed a silent, glowing object hovering near the base perimeter while he was stationed at a control tower. Shortly afterwards, with another policeman, he drove towards the hovering UFO, which was, he says, the size of a Walmart building and as long as an aircraft carrier. Mario witnessed beings and a strange ball-like object that shot around their vehicle. Both men suffered 5 hours of missing time, and they, and this is the most intriguing part, they and their vehicle were found parked on a dam way outside the base, 10 miles distant from where they'd encountered the object. The thing that's always got me was there were no tyre tracks around the muddy area around the vehicle. It looked like it had just been dropped into place. Mario and his colleague were threatened and told they had to sign an NDA about this extraordinary incident. So, gentlemen, I'm hoping you can solve the mystery for me. Are we meant to apologise to the US national security state for getting it all wrong for the last few years? It's all been a big misunderstanding. They were just lying to us to protect their weapons programs. Rob, let's start with you. What do you say to that?
Addressing the Wall Street Journal article, from an engineering background, I recognized that the equipment that they profiled, I went searching for the document that they sourced that from, and it wasn't put out for contract until June of 1971. So the Maelstrom incident was in March of 67. So there's no way that that instrumentation could have been fielded and tested. So then Joel, when he was presented with these documents on Twitter, presented another document from what he thought was 1967, but that wasn't put out for contract until June 67, and the incident happened in March. So there again, the EMP testing didn't occur in the context that they stated, and it wasn't on a live site.
So let me get this right. Mario, maybe you can help me here. As I understand it, the type of EMP, electromagnetic pulse testing, that the Wall Street Journal is relying on to support its contention that what Rob Salas saw wasn't in fact a UFO. It was, in fact, he didn't say he ever saw it. What he experienced was reports from above ground saying that there was a big hovering red orb object UFO hovering over his silo, and there were multiple people on the ground who were saying they could see this. The explanation is that this was some kind of electromagnetic pulse test. What is required, from what you know now from the documents that Rob has been able to get hold of from the archives, which, as Rob has made the point, post-date, they didn't actually come into existence, this technology, until well after this incident that happened in 1967. Describe to me what would have been required to have been erected at the site for this, in fact, to have been an elaborate electromagnetic pulse test.
Well, first, the actual size of what we're discussing here is tremendous. You couldn't have placed all that on 4 deuce and a half trucks. It would have taken more than that just to get it to the fence line. Evidently, that object hovered over the front gate of the facility. Now, there you had 6 security policemen on duty. And I know one of them, the flight security controller, was extremely upset. So, but you also have 2 officers that are off duty, a chief cook and a facility manager. So in total, you had six security policemen, 2 officers downstairs, 2 officers upstairs, 3 more people. So you have, what, 11 people total, I believe. And for this thing to be erected.
Before you get into that detail, so there are multiple first-hand witnesses saying...
It'd have to be. It would have to be, yeah.
So they're saying it wasn't an electromagnetic pulse test. There was certainly no briefing of an electromagnetic pulse test.
That just couldn't take place. So much authority would have to be done. They would never do an exercise like that with active nuclear weapons in our arsenal. They would never do that at a facility like that, at Oscar Flight. They wouldn't do it anywhere.
Yeah, and I know you guys...
I mean, you might as well take a Seawolf submarine and put it at 200 feet and flash it and see if it destroys whatever it can do. Are you going to take that chance? I mean, it's the same. It's equivalent.
Yeah, so I know a lot of you guys who've had these experiences with UAPs at missile sites, you all talk. And so I know a lot of you actually got together and shared your information together. So you've actually spoken, I understand, to Bob Salas in your time. You've been able to hear his account. And you've heard his account. You've heard the account of what people saw. Let's just deal with it very slowly. What do you think of the explanation that these people were all confused, that they didn't see what they say they saw with their A1 eyeballs, a UFO hovering over the site, that what they in fact failed to see were presumably some kind of concrete tower that would have had to have been erected to do this EMP test, according to the documents?
There is no way an object or anything could be erected that size right outside of the fence line, right over top of the gate on that facility without being seen. And how long would it take to set something like that up? When you're pouring concrete, setting pillars, placing a Marx generator in line with whatever it's got to be done. I mean, I don't know the real designs of the whole EMP thing, but I do know from the weight, the size, and the entire texture of the whole scenario is just way out of context. It just would never, that could not happen on a missile site. Too many people are there to see it that are armed.
I'm going to come to Rob in a moment. I want to go through the detail of what the documents from this EMP testing program actually show. But before we come to that, I want to get a clear statement from you, Mario, about the broad idea of what your training tells you about the implications of putting essentially a huge electromagnetic discharge through a thermonuclear missile site. In your wildest dreams, from what you know of how places like Malmstrom were run in those days and how you experienced it at Ellsworth Air Force Base, would the US Air Force, in your remotest dreams of what was possible, have ever, without knowing about the consequences of what would be involved, put an electromagnetic discharge of that magnitude through something as grave as a multiple thermonuclear missile site?
No way. They're just absolutely, no way will they ever do that. Joint Chiefs of Staff, whoever would have to approve that or even think about it. Further, it couldn't be erected in a half hour. It would be seen. Believe me, that would be a real serious threat without any communication whatsoever to the on-duty people.
Rob, would it not have been an absolute gross dereliction of duty for any senior officer in the US Air Force to have endorsed any kind of operation like that? And should there not be now an inquiry into the grave implications of the fact that, according to the head of the Pentagon's UFO investigation program, we are being asked to seriously believe that the US Air Force did one of the most reckless things in world history. It risked the deployment of multiple thermonuclear missiles in the mid-1960s by putting a massive electromagnetic discharge through a nuclear missile site. Isn't that the most significant admission if what Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick is saying is true?
Yes, because there's no precedence to testing live ICBMs, armed warheads, with an EMP pulse to just see what's going to happen if we spark this off. The mock up alone required 5 towers with 2 footings each of 3,200 pounds of concrete with anchor bolts that would have they assembled the A-frames on the ground and then erected them. So they're 1,000 feet long, 30 feet in diameter with each hoop on each frame. So that would have taken days for the concrete setup. It required cranes to lift the A-frames into place. And you're talking about 1,000-foot system. And then this giant Marks generator that has a maximum of 60 feet above the object that it's being testing on. And that's just complete gross dereliction to try and live test a nuclear ICBM site of 10 warheads.
But Rob, the Wall Street Journal reporter promised us that he'd gone through thousands of documents in this bombshell investigation. Just take me through the detail. You said it earlier, but I want you to go through the detail. The incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base that Bob Salas was a witness to, that the Air Force chose to selectively try and debunk, that was in 1967. What is the earliest evidence of the use of EMP testing on these kind of nuclear missile sites?
Oh, the first one that was profiled in the article was put out for contract, where it was awarded contract in June of 71, and then the initiation of fulfilling that began in October 71. So when he
So
was
that's
presented with
4
those,
years. 4 years after Malmstrom is the first ever recorded incident in the US Air Force documents. And more importantly, these are the documents that Mr. Shetman from the Wall Street Journal chose to rely upon in order to make the assertion that this was an EMP test, didn't he?
yes, but the initial contract doesn't even mention ICBM sites. It's just a generalized canned specification to test hardened facilities. Because with my engineering background, we did high-end commercial and DoD contract buildings for overpressure, under pressure, and which is entirely different from the blast resistance and the MP hardening. So the contract in question in the article profiled those two different specifications to test for the over under pressure and the EMP testing, but
Now,
but
I want to
never
get
indicated that it was for an ICBM site.
And so, to get it very, very clear, the documents which well post-date, the years after when they were first initiated, one, the contract didn't contemplate thermonuclear missiles being used in such a test at all. That would be grossly irresponsible.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, it didn't begin until years afterwards. As Mario has said, you would have needed, and as you've said, you would have needed these absolutely gigantic 60-foot tall, multiple 1,000-ton concrete pillars in order to execute this test.
The steel A-frames, but they had to pour the footings that were 5
Yeah.
foot by 4 foot by 2 feet deep. It takes a couple, 3 days for that concrete to harden with the eye bolts. Then they assemble the metal frames with the hoops in it. And once they're all assembled, then they pull up the whole 1,000-foot span with a crane to get them vertical. And then you have an antenna that's basically 30 feet in diameter and 1,000 feet long. And then you have to set the generator over the top of the facility. This huge multi-story size generator that has a maximum of 60 feet above the facility.
Now, this would be funny if it wasn't so serious, because from when you read the Wall Street Journal report, it's quite clear Sean Kirkpatrick gloats and boasts that he briefed the Director of National Intelligence at the time, Avril Haines, the person who is America's intelligence czar, that this kind of thing was happening. More importantly, he briefed her on the disinformation operation that had been run by the US Air Force, basically where US Air Force officers were being told that this was a classified program, Yankee Blue, and that this was all a big lie. In and of itself, I think the gravest implication to me is that this cockamamie bull story has been fed to the Director of National Intelligence by the man in the Pentagon who was responsible for investigating the UAP program, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. God help us, it looks like Avril Haines bought it. She seems to have accepted this explanation. What are the implications for that in terms of the level of deceit that is clearly going on? I just don't see how anyone can possibly believe that this deliberate disinformation program is part of a strategy just to hide weapons programs, when clearly they have been briefing officers for decades and decades and decades into the existence of an alien technology retrieval program, and now they're trying to to cover their butts to explain to the president and the senior people in intelligence why these people are now coming forward. They're also having to try and explain the evidence of good men like Colonel Bob Salas and Mario Woods, both of whom have had incidents at nuclear weapons sites. What are the implications from either gentleman that wants to comment on this? What are the implications about what this says about the way in which senior levels of the intelligence community, the people we, the public, entrust to protect the public interest in all of this, are being deceived about this issue?
Well, let me further expand on what the article stated. Kirkpatrick's reasoning for why Salas and et al. Were never informed of these on-site testings was because it's classified and they didn't want the Russians to know. But the report from initial report in question was never classified. It was open source. It was a generalized contract, never classified. So that in its face was incorrect that Kirkpatrick is advancing. And then Joel tried to put out another document to preempt that one when he was presented with these documents showing that didn't exist yet. He put another document out on Twitter that was from 1967, but again, that contract wasn't awarded until June of 67, so the production didn't start till afterward.
And as I understand it, the reporter from the Wall Street Journal, Joel Shetman, he was one of the two reporters that headlined this story and called it a bombshell. He initially posted a document which he said supported his claim that there was this EMP capability in 1967. But I think it was you that pointed out that that document was later taken down when you pointed out to him the fact that that document post-dated the incident that Bob Salas witnessed.
Yeah, initially I thought it was taken down, but I think it was the algorithms in Twitter kind of moved it off to the side somehow to where it wasn't discoverable every time I went looking for it. But still, the fact remains that was put out for contract in June 67. The incident happened in March 67, and that was for a proposed ICBM system that didn't even exist and never was produced. This was the Minuteman system.
Yeah. So, Mario, let's come to you. I mean, I know when you work in your role as a security officer in a nuclear missile site, you are obviously read into a lot of stuff about the importance of protecting the security of what is essentially the most important weapon in the American arsenal. It's a thermonuclear weapon. It can essentially irradiate hundreds of square miles of Central America. And so, you've got to be very careful with these weapons. Just give me your gut response to the claim that all this was a secret EMP test and that you and anyone else that had been topside in that nuclear missile site that day wouldn't have noticed the kind of construction that Rob is talking about, that the contract actually says would have been required to have been built in 1967 for this to be true.
Ross, in South Dakota, we've seen buffalo coming from 20 miles away. You're on high prairie land and it's flat, and your fence line is the highest thing around you. The state tree is a Maubell telephone pole, and it's on a road somewhere. There is no way that anybody could approach us from any direction. These facilities are built to fight from. That's why, lights emanate, project outward. Your fence line is secure, barbed wire at the top. Everything is secure, but the main objective, for one, is to keep those guys in that capsule safe so they can turn those keys if necessary and fight off whatever we can to survive or anyway. We are there to protect that resource, and we will do anything in order to do so. And it's not just us. We pick up a phone or a direct line to Wing Security Control that's back at a major base. You've got a 6-man fire team coming out in a helicopter, a QRT. You've got
So
armored personnel carriers coming. You've got everything coming. Nothing
it's
is going. These guys could not do that. What has been described. There's no possible way.
but knowing what you know about how careful, thank God, the US Air Force is with protecting these weapons, is there any conceivable possibility at all that somebody like Bob Salas wouldn't be briefed and read into a proposal to put even your wildest dreams
No.
an electromagnetic pulse
No.
through a missile site?
I often look. He and I, we have like a communion thing because he was an officer in which I protected not him per se, but many others just like him. And I wonder, being he was a deputy down in that capsule, and I've been down there. I've been in the capsule, and it's secure. And when they close that plug, you hear the vacuum, and you're in a capsule, and it's big enough that you're okay. But they're far enough apart. Him being the deputy, I mean, I can only imagine what took place that night. He gets a call from upstairs from the flight security controller. And they say, "Sir, we've got something out here. We can't figure out what the hell it is. And it's glowing. It's huge. It's over our fence line, and we don't know what to do with it." And at the same time he gets that information, all of a sudden, his annunciator panel just starts blipping off, and that's directly related to his rockets that are out there miles away. The rockets are not where you are. You live at a launch control facility 3 days at a time and off for 4. I think they were 2 on, 2 off. I'm not sure, something like that. But there is no way, him getting that information, what went through that man's mind? And I often think that because I knew a lot of those officers, we played ping pong together out there in the sites. I mean, we had a little gym set up, I mean, it's not just go out there and you're just gung ho dude. I mean, you have fun while you can. You read a lot. You play backgammon. You hit ping pong. You read. I mean, there's all kind of things to do. Of course, we only had 3 TV channels back then. But what I'm saying is, I wonder what went through his mind when that flight security controller called in. And mind you, that FSC had to already notify Wing Security Control, so it wasn't just Lieutenant Salas in the capsule. There was also a captain down there, and he tells who that captain is. So with what was going on in his mind, how many hours passed when he came up that elevator for relief? Now there's 2 other officers upstairs, so they had to know what's going on too. It wasn't just surprise. I mean, he got told and saw what he saw. He said the flight security controller was curled up in a chair. I believed it because I've lived it.
But you're quite clear that there is absolutely no way. I mean, one of the things I do admire, I've actually toured a nuclear missile site in the United States, and I can remember the degree of security that we went through.
Delta One in South Dakota,
yeah.
What do you think about the sign on the door?
It's the whole place is just terrifying. But the thing that really impressed me,
it's a Domino's pizza sign. It says, let's see, delivery within 30 minutes or less, and the second one's free. And it's painted on the whole blast door. You can't miss it. They got free Domino's pizzas for years when they put that on there.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I had to tell you that.
No, that's all right. That's fine. But the thing that really blew me away was there is just no way that you would surprise the earnest young officers that are trusted with this incredible weapon with any kind of surprise. Everybody has to know what's happening. The degree of briefing is intense. Rob, can I come to you for a moment? I'm interested in drawing you on the motives. Like, what do you think of the broad claim that is being made by Kirkpatrick and presumably a whole lot of people on background, including by implication Susan Goff, the Pentagon's PR woman, who's been one of the mouthpieces for the disinformation coming out of the Pentagon on this whole issue. What do you think of this explanation that essentially this has been a decades-long disinformation operation to protect sensitive weapons programs? I actually think there's some truth in that they have used the UAP subject to try to obscure stealth programs like the SR-71 and then later on the 117, all of the new stealth planes that have been developed. But I do not accept that, from what my witnesses are telling me, that this is the full explanation for what took place. What's your take?
Well, my understanding is it's illegal to perform information operations or psyops on the American people in contiguous United States. And Susan Go is a public affairs officer, but she was also a colonel in psyops career in the Army. So this is what she does for a living, and she helped write the plans, and she argued for a domestic information control. I understand there's legitimate concerns to need to mask black projects, but this is a continuation of trying to discount the UFO topic as anything other than mundane. And if there's nothing there, why are they going to such great lengths to discount it? Why
And
wasn't it the
just to
acting
bolster what
director?
just to bolster what you're saying and referring to here, we're talking about Executive Order 12333, which essentially came out of the Church Commission in the 1970s, and it was essentially an order from the president that the United States intelligence community is not allowed to conduct intelligence operations against the American public, and that includes disinformation. So, to make your point very, very clear, you have a former officer, or actually a serving officer in the US military, Susan Goff, in the Pentagon, supporting a claim being made by a civilian officer in the Pentagon, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, that there was a disinformation operation, a lie, where officers were induced to sign NDAs under threat of death if they revealed anything about this secret Yankee Blue program, which, according to Dr. Kirkpatrick, was a cover for secret weapons programs. It's just totally implausible, isn't it, that the United States would run such an active disinformation operation against its own officers?
Well, there's a clause that allows through the executive branch, if it's under the national security interest, that they would be allowed within certain constraints to do that. And they relaxed the Smith-Mundt Act in 2012, the Modernization Act, to allow for certain instances for the what was previously foreign information operations to be facilitated in the United States and on U.S. citizens under the guise of national security. So they have a loophole through the White House that theoretically could allow this to take place if indeed there's substance here to the UFO topic and they need to guard it like they would nuclear secrets, then that would justify their use of psyops on the American people. Otherwise, there's no legitimate excuse to be doing this.
In and of itself, though, this is, I mean, I'm actually gobsmacked that the Pentagon has put this forward as an explanation. Because what they've done is they've implicitly admitted something that now requires investigation. I don't know what's more serious, running a disinformation operation against its own officers and the public, or, as Mario has pointed out, the incredibly dangerous act of putting an electromagnetic pulse through a site that controls nuclear weapons. In and of itself, this must be investigated, mustn't it?
Absolutely. I wouldn't have my stash of July 4th fireworks and just, for curiosity's sake, go fire up my 5,000 watt generator and hook the jumper cables onto it and see what happens. And there's no metrology equipment that was installed on the base to figure out what the results were. I mean, taking 10 ICBMs offline with an EMP, they didn't know if they were going to come back online or not. And then you're compromising a whole wing of missiles. So it's just ludicrous at its face that they would do that. And there's no metrology equipment to test the results.
I mean, frankly, I would have hoped and expected that the officers that had ordered such an operation would have been put before a courts martial and asked to explain themselves. I mean, it's a gross dereliction of duty, isn't it, Mario, to put the strategic nuclear deterrence at risk with some kind of pulse weaponry without knowing the consequences?
No one has that authority. That's just the end of it. I mean, nobody has the authority to conduct such an experiment. Perhaps Sandia National Labs or some of the other laboratories, they may have done that, but not on an active in-service missile complex. There's just no way that they would be taken down in a test. There's no way.
I just want to deal with one thing. Robert Hastings, who's written the excellent book UFOs and Nukes and done by far the most comprehensive analysis of these incidents involving UFOs and ICBM sites, nuclear missile sites. He talks about how there was a press conference that he was at in 2010 where a former Minuteman missile targeting officer stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Captain Robert Jamison, was involved in retargeting the 10 ICBMs that had actually been simultaneously knocked offline on that March evening that Bob Salas witnessed in 1967. And according to Captain Jamison, Bob says, multiple targeting teams, including his, were given an unprecedented special UFO briefing prior to them being released to the field, during which it was stated, quote, a UFO had caused the multiple missile failures. And they were instructed to report a UFO to their command post should one be sighted while they travelled to the full shutdown site at Oscar Flight, which was near Royan, Montana. And they were further instructed that should a UFO appear while they were on site at one of the launch facilities, they were to quickly enter the silo and close the personnel hatch. So do you find it at all plausible that the team that was being sent in to repair these missiles after they'd been knocked out by what Bob Salas says was a UFO, not an EMP pulse, do you find it plausible that the US Air Force, after conducting supposedly an EMP test, would then send in a team without properly briefing them about what it was that had been done to those missiles?
Now, there's a possibility. There honestly is a possibility, but they could not get underground to get to that missile by themselves. It would take security personnel there. There's a whole bunch of clearances and authorization to even get down into a silo. You have 3 different plugs that you've got to go through to get there, and nobody has all the combinations for all 3. So they did do work like that by opening the silo, pulling the missile out, putting it in a trailer that concealed its view from anybody driving by. And it was shielded from what I understand, and work was done inside these trailers. You can Google those trailers if they carried them in, and place the missile back. I don't know if that could be done or not, but just the security measures to get to and from, and then you said to close a personnel hatch. Well, there's a whole lot more to it than just closing the door.
Rob, why the hell have they come out now with this dopey, daffy, block-headed explanation for the cover-up? Why? It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. All it's going to do, surely, is blow up in their face because, as members of Congress have indicated, they're going to be very, very aggressively investigating the UAP issue over coming months.
Well, we walk this back to David Grush's testimony, the whistleblower that was the most senior whistleblower ever on this topic, in July 26, 2023, to Congress, where he testified that there's an illegal off-book SAP program that is retrieving and reverse engineering UAP. And with him being a staffer now with Burleson's office, I think there's momentum gaining to where and the FBI now is coming online, where I think the DoD is starting to lose control of this narrative. And I think they're afraid that the truth may come out, and they're trying to do damage control and throw everything they can at it to try and suppress it at 11th hour save, to keep their programs under wraps. Because let's just say that there is legitimacy to this topic, and we do have craft and bodies and reverse engineered tech, that would be exponentially higher state secrets than the nuclear secrets would be. So they're going all in to try and keep this concealed, and it's been such a decades-long secret. Even the senior commanders and such don't know anymore that these exist.
But the thing I find most sinister about this is, according to the article, one of the people that was fed what I suspect is a disinformation line from the Pentagon was the Director of National Intelligence herself, Avril Haines. And we've got Tulsi Gabbard now in the DNI role. Do you think Tulsi Gabbard is going to buy this explanation if she's offered it by the Pentagon?
There's not been any documentation to support any of the assertions in the Wall Street Journal or the narratives that the PAO office through Susan Go and them. Nothing has been publicly documented. And Kirkpatrick said he briefed Avril Haines in 2023 on the Yankee Blue program, and with the NDAs that they had to sign for life or they'll get executed supposedly with a hazing ritual, but there was nothing in the official report. And if this narrative is true, then why isn't the existing director of Aero out acknowledging us instead of the former.
It's very interesting the way they've used Kirkpatrick, isn't it? And I notice subtly the Wall Street Journal used Ms. Goff, Susan Goff, to basically support Kirkpatrick's claims. But it's interesting. I don't know whether Dr. John Kozlowski, who I am told is a good man and who is increasingly being given a lot of evidence that is, I'm sure, upsetting the apple cart inside the Pentagon, I don't know whether he'd be so willing to be part of the cover-up. What worries me is why now? Obviously, you're saying that we're at a time when the push from Congress is tightening the noose around those who have engineered this cover-up for so long. It does tend to indicate, though, that they're digging in for a fight and that they're willing to lie to the most senior people in the US intelligence establishment. That's the implication, surely, isn't it, of what we're seeing here? They're using one of the most powerful papers in the United States to essentially push a line that includes disinformation fed, presumably not just to the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, but also to the White House. Is our president being misled? Is Donald Trump being told the truth about UAPs? What do you gentlemen think?
If I may, Ross, I don't think it's all within the military. I think it's in the military-industrial complex, which I worked for 14 years. I think they make direct instructions on what they're going to do with this widget or that widget or what they're doing, and whoever's down the line doing their reporting in their official offices or what have you, they're being told what to do. And they're being told what to say. I believe we have technology. There's no doubt in my mind, because what I saw was technology that we can't even imagine yet. And I can't imagine the rest of it.
Well, Mary, I can't let you go without I can't let you go without you telling me some of your story. What did you see that night?
Well, a craft honestly the size of a Walmart building. And it was like a red, white, yellow plasma sitting 5 to 10 feet on top of a blast door. 1 o'clock in the morning on November 5 missile site. We got the call actually at about 12:05 p.m. that night, or a.m. that night. And we responded. We were at November Control, which is 7 miles away from November 1. And travel time was about 15 minutes. And this thing was a sit-4, so it was a 2-pronged alarm, just real quick. Upon departing the site, and I had seen this thing earlier that night and flipped facility lights at it. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was B-52 bombers doing low sortie flights.
Was it a solid object? Was it a hard object or just a plasma?
Well, I didn't see any tail section. I didn't see any type of portholes. I saw no fins, controlling surfaces whatsoever. It was an absolute sphere, as if it was on fire, or like if you see a welder's light and that plasma effect off of it. There's something in the middle of it, and it's huge. It was just gargantuan, and it displaced the atmosphere. It took the air away. It put a pressure on mine and my partner's chest. It felt like I was being pulled up into the back seat of the vehicle. And this all happened within a few seconds on the site arrival. And we pulled up at a 45-degree angle, 60 to 80 feet from the gate at November 5, which is still there today. I didn't know what to do. I mean, the words just can't even come to your mind. And I literally grabbed what I thought was a mag light, but of course they didn't make them commercially till 79. I've been corrected. 77, I have a 3D cell aluminum light. I pulled myself up on the windowsill. I had a mitten on this hand, on my left hand, and I didn't have anything on my right hand, so I could activate the flashlight. And I just went across the blue bubbles of the vehicle, and why I flashed the lights at it, I had flashed my flashlight at this gargantuan thing. I don't know. But the same thing that I'd done at November Control. When I pulled people out there, Michael Johnson out there to see this thing. And but the next thing I know, I slid down on the seat, and this black ball about 6 times the size of a beach ball, it just came out of nowhere right down in front on the hood of the truck, and it had no words for it. It had vents all the way around it. I don't know. It was just so fast, and it went straight up, straight down, around the left, around the right, came back, and it was gone. Then a smell just simply overtook me. That smell like shrimp, like iodine. I was raised in Tampa, Florida, so we used to always fish, I smelled this shrimp smell, just really strong. And I thought, what is that? And at the same time, as I was sitting in the seat, when I flashed that flashlight at it and I sat down in the seat, I told Michael Johnson, I said, it's going to be okay now. Why I said that, I don't know. But it seemed as if everything in that vehicle was just slowed down to nothing. I could see particles, and because it was so illuminated inside the vehicle, I could see like particles coming out of the vent work of that F-154 pickup truck. That was our response vehicle. Security police standard pickup truck, 2-wheel drive. And then that smell. And then the next thing I know, I got my weapon between my legs, and I knew something was on the right side of me. And it gives me chills right now because I had rolled my window up, and I knew I only had an 1/8 piece of glass between me and whatever was out there.
And
Even
there was
though
some kind of being, some kind of non-human
4 of
being.
them, yeah, 3 small and 1 tall. So I've seen them too. I've smelled them and I've seen them. And I know exactly what they look like. And I do have some drawings of them. And believe me, it freaks me out right now. You know, it really does. And it's very difficult because I couldn't talk about that in my debriefing. And in my debriefing, I told the commander every single thing, but there's so much more to it. We really need to discuss it. This takes a while, and I'm sorry to tell you. But that's the last thing I remember until I woke up. We were in total light, super light. And all of a sudden, the next thing I know, I popped my eyes open and we're in total darkness. And I told Michael Johnson, I said, where the hell are we? What's going on? Because we were just at November 5. And I reached down and grabbed that door because he wasn't talking to me. I didn't know what was wrong with him. I hadn't figured it out yet. And I had bunny boots on, rubber boots, that for cold. It was 9 to 13 degrees that night. So the ground was frozen, some snow on the ground. And I stepped out in mud on my right foot. And I go, what? I said, what the hell? And then the radio cracked a laugh and it said, wing security control to November 1. And I said, are you going to get that? Thinking he just wasn't been talking. He was completely frozen to that steering wheel, Ross, completely frozen, eyes open, breathing. I mean, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life, a human being lock up like that. And there was a white wall.
And you were 10 miles from where you'd been previously.
9.5 miles.
His vehicle was sitting facing out on a single lane beside a concrete wall at the reservoir.
That's the backside of the.
So he's pointing out.
Yeah, it was pointing the only way it could exit. You couldn't have gone in there with a 2-wheel drive vehicle and turned around. And behind me was a slough, but I didn't know what that white wall was because as far as I could see behind me, because it was dark, and as far as I could see in front of me, it was a white wall, but it was at an angle. And as it got lighter, it occurred to me, I said, what time is it? And I looked at my watch, and it was like 6 a.m. So we'd arrived at the site at 1 a.m., thereabouts, and next thing I know, it's 6 a.m., and I can't get Michael Johnson to talk at all until they're looking for us.
So you got 5 hours of missing time and you have no recollection of what transpired between the moment when the object clearly engaged with you and when you found yourself waking up at the dam site 9.5 miles distant.
Correct. Until hypnosis, and that put me in AFib. So if people tell you that they can't be hypnotized, don't believe it, because right now I'm shaking. But until I was hypnotized, and that was Robert Hastings and Jared Tarbell took care of that for me and arranged that. He's my mentor.
When was that, Mario?
2017, 2018, I think. I can't remember, but I have a copy of the DVD until I did it again in 23.
Mario, can I ask you this? You're clearly being gaslit by your own government. I mean, that's the thing I find so shabby about this is...
It gets a lot worse. If I told you the personal outcome of all this, you wouldn't believe it. You just wouldn't believe it. And I mean, if you're enlisted, it's one thing. If you're an officer, it's another thing. And you ask anybody in any service, will tell you the same thing. The way you're treated is directly related to where you're an officer or you're enlisted. And Tulsi Gabbard or anybody can't tell me any different. She was an officer, and she would be handled completely different than what I was handled with my partner, Michael Johnson. And we've been looking for him for 47 years. A lot of money's been spent trying to find him with no luck. Rob searched for him. I've had all kinds of people search for him. There's even been paid investigators looking for him. And he told me he lived in Chicago, or his parents did. He was single when he came to mine and my wife's apartment in Rapid City. And yeah, I was at Ellsworth in South Dakota, not North Dakota, by the way.
And you and your wife had a conversation with Michael Johnson, your colleague that night,
Yeah.
who basically confirmed the
Yeah.
experience.
And she recently did that also on with a podcast that I did on Limitless podcast. He communicated with her and she talked about that.
But can I just ask you this? I'm trying to get a bit of the emotional thing for you. You've had your credibility attacked for year after year after year because you've stuck to your story. You've basically said, in the face of skeptical debunkers, including this latest one in the Wall Street Journal, you've stuck to your story that you were in some way taken, that you were moved by some kind of perhaps non-human intelligence that night. What does it feel like to be called a liar by your own government?
You know, they've done about their worst, so I don't really give a damn what they do any longer. I pay my taxes. I work a job. I'll be 70 in September, and I hope to retire by next April. I want to race my RC cars, go to the range all the time, and shoot like I do, fish, and enjoy life. I don't really care what they do, what they say. I don't really care if Congress calls me or not. They have twice, but they've never gone through with it. You know why? Because they have to get the pedigrees and the degrees out of the way first. They cannot deal with first-hand experiencers. Name one that they've dealt with. None. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And this
That's
is the
right. They
thing,
can't
Rob,
deal with that.
yeah, this is the thing, Rob, that I think is absolutely fundamental to this lame attempt in this Wall Street Journal article to debunk the
And
whole
I
issue.
asked Kirkpatrick, I challenged him. I said, you sit me down and talk to me any part about anything that you want to ask me that happened that night, and I can tell you. Through hypnosis, I can tell you more. Through the secondary hypnosis with Yvonne Smith in LA, I can tell you a whole lot more. And I have marks on my body. That night I was burned on the top of my face, on top of my head right here, and on the back of my hand, which the flight surgeons took samples off of me, and Michael Johnson. The other thing, you heard of Rick Doty?
Yes, I know of Rick Doty. I'm not quite
Okay.
sure whether to believe him or
No,
not. He's
I hear you. I hear you. And it's a very hard thing. Well, he lives in my history. And he lives in my history as that day in Colonel Spraker's office that I was taken by Master Sergeant Gray to the SATAP building in Ellsworth Air Force Base, an hour and 15-minute ride back from November Control. When I walked in or reported in, had to be the very formal way, knocking on the door frame, the whole 9 yards, pronouncing myself and everything else. He was sitting at his desk. I walked in, saluted, stated my name, everything else about me. Rick Doty was the junior officer in OSI sitting next to a Captain Jack Reed. Then there was a man in a tweed suit. Then there was a deputy base commander. And then there was Colonel Spraker. And then it started right there. So I was told by somebody who's very credible to me and I look up to that it may have been a time during his career where he was just starting out and perhaps he didn't embellish on anything that, which came later as he was kind of known for. So that's the way I have to take it, and I can't do anything about it. It took me 5.5 years to get an email from him, and now we email once in a while. We were also on a podcast together.
So Doty's admitted that he was there that day, that he met.
Yeah, that's correct. He was tasked with getting our medical records from the flight surgeon's office.
And were you ever able to get those medical records that proved the burns on your forehead?
I couldn't get them. I've done everything I can to obtain those records or anything written. I'm currently in a reevaluation with the VA because I do have some medical problems, and that part I just cannot. I just can't access or Freedom of Information Act. I just can't get my records or all my training records even.
Mario and Rob, the key issue behind the Wall Street Journal article is it leaves the reader with the impression that there is no first-hand evidence. Rob, how much first-hand evidence has there been, including from witnesses who've given evidence under oath, asserting that there is a legacy retrieval program of non-human technology that's secretly attempting to reverse engineer that technology?
This goes clear back to Kehoe in the 50s, that we've had senior enlisted and officers in the military and government and civilians that have expressed firsthand evidence and testimonies throughout each decade. This is cyclic. I mean, David Grush was not the first senior intelligence person to come forward with this, and he was able to state later in 23 with Charles McCullough in a BBC interview that he had indeed seen firsthand evidence of some sort
Exactly.
to prove this. So it wasn't the Wall Street Journal is trying to frame a narrative, reverse engineer it, that this is all a small group of people within the government, the DoD, that have constructed a false narrative, and it's all circular reporting with no supporting evidence that they have amplified through the decades to this culmination of what they say is this hazing incident of Yankee Blue or whatever they call it, to completely delegitimize all the sincere efforts, suffering, and everything that all these people have testified before. But we've got the serviceman from Rendlesham Forest that
Mm-hmm.
is now getting benefits because of his injury sustained for the government. So that legitimized that there were anomalous effects from
Absolutely.
exposure to these.
This is the thing that worries me at the moment, though, that you've got evidence from people like you, Mario. You've got evidence, as you say, Rob, from David Grush, who has actually told the BBC that he does have first-hand evidence that he's happy to testify about in a secret skiff hearing.
And 40
And
more
there are other
behind him.
people. You've got Lukatsky, you've got Jay
Yeah.
Stratton, who I quoted earlier, you've got Lou Elizondo. All of these people are saying they have first-hand evidence, and some of them have actually testified to the accuracy of what they're saying under oath. So now we have a situation where you have the Pentagon, Sean Kirkpatrick, Susan Goh, the PR woman for the Pentagon, making one claim, and you have a whole host of other people who've had the guts to put their record on the record under oath. It's time those two stories were tested. There's
Yes.
an opportunity here, isn't there, for the Pentagon's veracity to finally be tested. I wonder if this Wall Street Journal article won't be seen as a tipping point where the Pentagon finally went too far. It overdid it overplayed its hand. Do you suspect they have overplayed their hand here?
Absolutely. And I think the suppression of investigating David Grush's ICIG whistleblower complaint and the other 40 witnesses that were first-hand witnesses that were either members currently or formerly of the legacy program in question, the suppression of that investigation alone speaks volumes. I think you know, people ask me a lot what would be the best opportunity to try and crack this open as far as the government acknowledging that this is legitimate. I think it would be pushing for those whistleblower complaints to be that investigation to be followed up through because no one to date has been able to discount David Grush's testimony, and instead they attack his credibility by allegedly leaking where to find the FOIA documents through that certain reporter that I don't want to mention his name to impugn him for his PTSD incidents that he had through legitimate service. So they're trying to attack the messenger. Why would they do that if there's nothing there?
So, Mario, in closing, and thank you to both you and Rob for coming on Reality Check today. Mario, you've already, I know, come forward multiple times to give your evidence. But if you were asked to swear in a court, in the Congress, on a stack of Bibles, knowing that you face perjury, prosecution for telling a falsehood, would you testify to the veracity of what you've told me today?
Every word, yes. I've raised my hand many a time and taken that oath, and I'd be happy to do it again.
Have
No,
you ever had a fair hearing for what you say happened to you that day, that evening in 1977? Have you ever been given the opportunity to have a fair hearing before a proper inquiry?
no, never.
Do you get the impression the US Air Force, the Pentagon, and some in the US government just want people like you to go away?
Yes. Yeah, they're afraid. They really are afraid. I've had black sedans cruise in front of my neighborhood, cutting the grass. and take pictures of me. I don't know. There was a government vehicle. I know that. I pay my taxes. I pay my bills. So, but I do know that happened. And it happened prior to going out to Robert's place, as a matter of fact.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much to both of you for coming on Reality Check and going through the detail of why part one of the Wall Street Journal hatchet job was a complete joke. There is going to be a part two, and apparently that's going to be a hatchet job on Lou Elizondo. So let's see what they come up with in that one. But I suspect, based on part one, it's going to be a pretty miserable effort. Thank you again to both of you gentlemen. And before we go, please don't forget to send in any questions you have for me to realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. Looking forward to answering your questions as best as we can.